The phone lit up my nightstand at 3:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, the way I usually do these days. When you get to my age, 63 last February, sleep becomes a negotiation. Some nights you win. Most nights you don't. I looked at the screen and saw my daughter's name. Lily. My stomach dropped before I even answered. Dad. Her voice was barely above a whisper, thin, like she was afraid someone might hear her. Dad, I need you to come get me. I sat up. Lily, what's wrong? Are you hurt? A pause. Too long. I'm at Philip's parents' place. In Muskoka. I can't explain everything right now. Please, Dad, please come. Then the line went quiet. Not disconnected, just quiet. Like someone had walked into the room. I was already reaching for my car keys. Let me back up a little, because you need to understand what kind of family I'm talking about. Not to excuse anything, but because the whole story doesn't make sense without it. My name is Gordon. I spent 31 years working in insurance. Not the glamorous end of it, not Bay Street investment stuff, liability claims. Sitting across from people on the worst days of their lives, helping them figure out what they were owed. I'm good at reading people. I'm good at noticing when something doesn't add up. My ex-wife, Patricia, used to say I was too suspicious of everyone. Maybe she was right, but that habit of noticing, it's what saved my daughter's life. Lily is my youngest. 28 years old, sharp as a tack, works in environmental consulting out of Ottawa. She met Philip Hart 3 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding in Kingston. He seemed fine to me at first, polished, well-spoken. Came from money. His father, Desmond, had built a small empire in commercial real estate up in the Muskokas and around the Simcoe County area. The kind of family that has a cottage the size of most people's actual houses. Philip proposed after 14 months. Lily said yes. I smiled and shook his hand and said all the right things, because that's what you do. But somewhere in the back of my mind, that small, quiet alarm was already ticking. It wasn't anything I could point to directly. Philip was always perfectly pleasant to me, but I noticed how he answered questions on Lily's behalf when we were all together. How he'd redirect conversations away from certain topics. How, whenever I asked Lily something directly, how work was going, whether she was happy, she'd glance at him first before she answered. Just a fraction of a second. Most people wouldn't catch it. I caught it every time. They got married 18 months ago at a vineyard outside of Niagara-on-the-Lake. Beautiful day. Lily looked stunning. I walked her down the aisle and I held it together, right until the moment she squeezed my hand, and then I didn't hold it together at all. After the wedding, they moved into a condo in the Glebe neighborhood in Ottawa. I'd drive up from my place in Kingston every few weeks to take Lily for lunch when Philip was at work. She seemed happy enough. Busy, but there was a quietness to her that hadn't been there before. A careful quality, like someone who had learned to measure their words. Then, about 8 months into the marriage, her grandfather died. My father-in-law, Lily's maternal grandfather, Thomas Belcourt, passed away at 81 after a long illness. Thomas was a stubborn, wonderful, quietly generous man who had worked 40 years as a machinist in Hamilton. He didn't have much in the way of flash, but he'd been careful his whole life. When the estate was settled, it turned out Thomas had left Lily a trust fund. Not obscene money, about $340,000. But for a 28-year-old just starting out, it was significant. Life-changing, if managed properly. I found out from Patricia, who called me the same week to tell me. I called Lily to congratulate her. She sounded strange, distant. She said Philip was helping her figure out the best approach. I said that was great, and maybe she should also talk to an independent financial advisor, someone with no stake in the outcome. She said she would. I don't think she ever did. The drive from Kingston to Muskoka at 4 in the morning is almost 3 hours if you're respecting the speed limit, which I was not entirely doing that night. The 401 was empty. The sky was that particular shade of dark blue that comes right before the world decides to wake up. I called Lily twice more. No answer either time. I called Philip, straight to voicemail. I knew the address of the Hart family's cottage. I'd been there once, the previous Thanksgiving, for what had been an uncomfortable long weekend that I'd told myself afterward I was imagining the discomfort of. The property was on a private road off Highway 169, north of Gravenhurst, A big timber frame place on a lake, the kind of property that costs more than most people will earn in their lifetimes. I drove. I ran through possibilities in my head the way I used to run through claim files. Best case. Lily and Philip had a serious argument. She'd panicked. She needed someone to lean on. That I could handle. That was survivable. Worst case. I didn't let myself think about worst case yet. I just drove. I pulled onto the private road a few minutes before 7 in the morning. The trees were thick on either side, and the gravel crunched under my tires in the early quiet. When I got to the house, there were 2 cars in the drive. Philip's Audi and a silver Mercedes I recognized as belonging to Desmond, Philip's father. I parked, walked to the front door, and knocked. It took almost 2 full minutes before anyone answered. The woman who opened the door was Philip's mother, Beverly Hart. She was in her early 60s, immaculate even at that hour, the kind of woman who seems to have been born already dressed for a dinner party. She looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as controlled irritation, like someone who had been expecting an inconvenience and had prepared accordingly. "Gordon," she said, not warmly. "Beverly, where's Lily?" "Lily is resting." She didn't move from the doorway. She had a difficult evening. "She's not up for visitors." I felt something tighten in my chest. "She called me at 4 in the morning and asked me to come get her. She's not a visitor. She's my daughter. She was upset last night. She's calmed down. I think it's better if you let her sleep and perhaps come back later. Or..." "Beverly." I kept my voice even. I've had decades of practice keeping my voice even when I want to do anything but. "I'm not leaving without seeing her. You can let me in, or I can call the OPP and tell them my daughter contacted me in distress and I've been refused access to her." "Your choice." Something shifted behind her eyes. She opened the door. The cottage was all open-beam ceilings and expensive furniture, and the smell of coffee that nobody had offered me. Desmond was in the kitchen, reading something on a tablet. He looked up when I came in. He and I had never particularly liked each other. We were polite about it, the way men of a certain generation are trained to be, but there was no warmth there. "Gordon," he said. "Early start. Where is she?" He nodded toward a hallway. "Guest room. She's been sleeping since about 2. She called me at 10 to 4. He said nothing. I found the guest room at the end of the hall. I knocked twice, softly, and opened the door. Lily was awake. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her clothes from the day before, her knees pulled up to her chest. When she saw me, something in me too. I crossed the room and sat beside her, and didn't say anything for a moment. Just put my arm around her. She leaned into my shoulder the way she used to when she was 7 years old and had a bad dream. "I'm here," I said. "Tell me." It came out in pieces. That's how it always comes out when someone has been holding something in too long. Not in a clean narrative, but in fragments. Some of them out of order, some of them overlapping. I've heard people recount accidents the same way. Trauma scrambles the sequence. What I was able to piece together was this. Philip had been pressuring Lily for months to transfer the bulk of her trust fund, the inheritance from Thomas, into a joint investment account. That was technically held through one of Desmond's holding companies. Philip had framed it as a family investment opportunity, a development project north of Barrie that was supposedly going to return double in 3 years. He'd had documents drawn up. He'd had his father explain the financials to Lily over dinner, with charts. He'd been patient about it, and then less patient, and then, in the last few weeks, considerably less patient than that. Lily had stalled. She wasn't sure. Something felt off to her, but she couldn't identify exactly what, and every time she raised concerns, Philip had an answer for them. Smooth, reasonable-sounding answers that somehow left her feeling more confused than before, not less. The night before, at dinner, she'd told him she wanted to consult an independent lawyer before signing anything. The dinner had not gone well after that. She didn't use the word confrontation. She used the word discussion, but her hands were shaking slightly when she described it, and I noticed a redness near her left wrist that might have been nothing and might not have been nothing. And I decided in that moment that we were leaving this house, and the conversation about the rest of it would happen somewhere else. "Get your things," I said. "Dad, if I just leave, Philip is going to..." "Lily," I looked at her directly. "Get your bag, whatever you need for a few days. Leave everything else." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. Beverly was in the hallway when we came out. She'd positioned herself. There's no other word for it. Like someone who had given some thought to where to stand. I really think, she said, in the kind of measured tone that wants you to know it's being measured, that it would be better for everyone if Lily and Philip had a chance to talk this through before. This isn't a conversation, I said. Gordon, you're being reactive. I understand you're worried, but family matters are a family matter. Yes. I kept walking toward the door. Lily was half a step behind me, which is why I'm taking my daughter home. Philip appeared from somewhere, the living room, maybe, as we reached the front entrance. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked, to be honest, like a man who had spent several hours trying to decide what his face should be doing and hadn't fully settled on an answer. Lily. His voice had that careful steadiness I'd noticed before. The steadiness that isn't calm, that's something else wearing calm as a disguise. Can we just talk for a minute? Privately. She has my number, I said, and she has a lawyer she'll be speaking to on Monday morning. The word lawyer did something to the room. Not dramatic, no one shouted or slammed a door, but the temperature changed. Desmond, who had appeared from the kitchen, went very still. Beverly's expression settled into something flat and unreadable. Philip said, "There's no need for that. You're probably right," I said pleasantly, "but we'll find out." Then we walked out the door. I drove Lily back to Kingston. She slept for the first hour, her head against the window, the morning sun coming sideways through the glass. I didn't push for more information. She'd tell me what she needed to tell me when she was ready. We stopped for breakfast at a diner outside of Aurelia. Lily ordered tea and scrambled eggs and ate about half of each. I had coffee and let her set the pace. She told me more over breakfast. I listened without interrupting, which is harder than it sounds. The trust fund situation was more complicated than I'd initially understood. In the months after Thomas's estate had been settled, Philip had quietly encouraged Lily to add him as a co-signatory on the account for convenience. She had, because at the time they were newlyweds and that kind of thing seemed reasonable, the sort of administrative practicality that married people manage together. She hadn't thought much about it. What she hadn't fully understood, what, I suspect, she'd been deliberately kept from fully understanding, was that with co-signatory access and the right paperwork, a significant portion of those funds could be moved without requiring her independent authorization, provided the documentation was structured in a specific way. I used to review insurance fraud cases for a living. I know how people hide things in paperwork. I know the particular kind of language that makes something look routine until you read it carefully, and then it doesn't look routine at all. I asked Lily whether she still had copies of the investment documents Philip had shown her. She had photographs on her phone. She'd taken them quietly one evening when Philip wasn't in the room. She showed them to me across the diner table. I looked at them for a long time without saying anything. Then I asked her for the name of the holding company. She told me. I recognized it. Not from memory. I hadn't encountered it before. But I recognized the structure of it. A numbered company with a secondary operating name. Registered in Ontario but with a mailing address that turned out, when I looked it up later, to be a postal box in Vaughan. The development project north of Barrie that Philip had described so confidently at dinner didn't appear, after a search of municipal planning records, to have any active permits associated with it. I didn't tell Lily any of this at the diner. I just said we were going to get her some proper legal help, and that she shouldn't sign anything, and that she should not, under any circumstances, go back to that condo alone. She nodded. She looked tired and young and a little lost, and she also looked, underneath all of that, like someone who had been carrying a weight for months and had finally set it down. "I should have told you sooner," she said. "You're telling me now," I said. "That's enough." The following Monday I drove Lily to see a family law solicitor in Kingston named Deborah, who came recommended by a colleague of mine who'd been through a difficult divorce a few years back. Deborah was thorough and unhurried and asked all the right questions. Lily laid out everything. The investment documents, the co-signatory arrangement, the pressure that had escalated over the preceding months, the dinner that had ended with Lily calling me from the guest room floor at 3:47 in the morning because she hadn't known what else to do. Deborah listened. She made notes. At the end of the appointment, she told Lily that her concerns about the investment documents were well-founded, that the structure of the proposed transfer was irregular in several ways that a court would likely find significant, and that as Lily's first order of business, she should contact her bank and have the co-signatory access reviewed and, if possible, suspended pending further legal advice. Lily did that the same afternoon. She was on the phone with her bank for 40 minutes. At the end of the call, she came and found me in the kitchen where I was pretending to read the newspaper, and she said, "They told me a transfer request came in last Thursday." I put the paper down. "For how much?" $280,000. I sat with that for a moment. "It hadn't been processed yet," she said, "because the bank flagged it for a review. Standard procedure when the amount is over a certain threshold, and the account history doesn't reflect regular large transfers. They were going to contact me this week to verify." She sat down across from me. We looked at each other. "Thursday," I said. "That was 2 days before you called me." "Yes, Sis. So when you said at dinner that you wanted to speak to a lawyer, he knew the bank was about to contact me," she said quietly. "I think he was trying to get me to sign the authorization before I understood what I was actually signing. I don't have a lot of regrets in my life. I've made my share of mistakes. I'm not someone who thinks he's handled everything perfectly. But sitting at that kitchen table in Kingston with my daughter, I felt something I can only describe as the particular relief of having arrived somewhere just in time. Of having not talked yourself out of getting up at 4 in the morning. What followed wasn't quick or clean. These things never are. Deborah filed for a legal separation on Lily's behalf. In the process of discovery, the documentation around the holding company and the development project came under scrutiny. The firm Philip claimed had brought him in as an investment partner turned out to be, and this was confirmed by a securities compliance check that Deborah's office requested, under review by the Ontario Securities Commission, for activities that I don't want to go into in too much detail here, but let's say the word irregular came up in that context as well. Desmond's involvement was harder to untangle, and I'll be honest with you, some of it still is. He had a layer of insulation around him that made direct accountability difficult, but the numbered company and its connection to the Barry project was eventually flagged, and, while I don't know the full outcome of what the OSC's review produced, I know that the development Philip had described so enthusiastically at those dinners never got built, and I know that Desmond quietly sold the Muskoka property about 7 months later. Lily's trust fund, all $340,000 of it, stayed exactly where it belonged, in her account, in her name. Her grandfather Thomas, who spent 40 years making careful decisions so that one day the money might land somewhere safe, would have approved, I think, of the somewhat roundabout way it eventually got protected. The divorce was finalized 8 months ago. It was not pleasant. These things aren't, but Lily got through it, and she's back in Ottawa now, in a different apartment, and she started a new position at a firm that does wetland conservation assessments. Work she genuinely loves. She called me 2 weeks ago on a Sunday afternoon just to talk, the way she used to do when she was in university. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes about nothing important, about her neighbor's dog, about a book she was reading, about whether I should finally get my kitchen repainted. At one point she said, "I think about that drive a lot, that you just got in the car." I said, "Well, you asked me to." She said, "A lot of people wouldn't have. I've thought about that since." She might be right. I know men my age who would have hesitated, would have thought, "She's an adult, she can handle it. I don't want to make things worse. Maybe I should wait until morning and see how things look." I understand that instinct. It comes from a reasonable place, usually. The desire not to overreact. The awareness that marriages are complicated, and parents who insert themselves uninvited often do more damage than good. But here is what I know. When your child calls you at 4 in the morning and their voice sounds like that, there is no version of the situation in which you go back to sleep. There is no scenario where staying in bed is the right answer. The worry about overreacting is a luxury you have in the daytime. At 4 in the morning, when that voice comes through the phone, all of that falls away. You just get in the car. You drive toward your child. Everything else gets sorted out later. That's the only thing I've ever been sure I did right that year. I got up, and I went. I didn't wait for more information. I didn't talk myself out of it. I didn't decide it was probably fine. I didn't make my daughter's crisis wait for a more convenient hour. I got in the car, and I drove north through the dark until I found her. Lily is going to be fine. She already is, and Thomas's money sits in a registered account that she manages on her own terms, building something real the way he always intended it to. That's enough. For me, that's everything.